Okay. Hello, hello. I am Joe the Science Bro, and here we are again, able to talk with and share an aspect of my life that I haven't been able to share with you guys as of yet, which is science. This is one of the better ways for me to do so by letting you into the scientific process via this question and answer aspect. In fact, this is almost one of the purest forms of science, is questioning and answering. Some would refer to it almost in a Socratic light, in a way. I am joined today again by a friend, a colleague, a mentor, a director of the Center for Chronic Diseases of Aging, and I believe you were also a program chair. Were you not?
I was. I was the chair of our Department of Biomedical Sciences
Yes.
for about 7 years,
Lovely.
in addition to everything else I do.
Well, I want to thank you again for coming back and joining us. I know that I had a wonderful time last week, and I can also echo that same sentiment for our audience. I want to say hello to Aru Warrior and Aya. Thank you guys for joining us. And thank you for your questions last time. I had such a great time, I had to ask Dr. Balin to join us again.
Which is my pleasure to join too, Joe. Thank you.
I've been told that it's enough nonsense and it's time to talk about science. So, Aru Warrior always asks me what the science fact of the day is. So, Dr. Balin, why don't you give us a science fact of the day?
Science fact of the day. Let's see now. That's a tough one because there are a lot of science facts that
I'm
come
not
out
the only
on
one,
a daily
see?
basis.
I'm not the only one.
Let's see. One of the science facts is that artificial intelligence is being applied to understand how our brains age. And there's a new report out in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences suggesting that artificial intelligence in evaluating MRIs of brains and then comparing that to the biological age of people can help us determine that difference between biological age and brain aging, and that can actually help with predictions as to who could go on to, in an older age, to cognitive deficit. So the people looking at neurodegenerative diseases like myself could use that information to better predict how an individual could then lead to cognitive deficit and potentially a disease like Alzheimer's disease, which I have been studying for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a brain fact or a science fact.
Well, there you go.
For today.
So I did want to touch again on one of the aspects of our discussion last week, and that is how the brain, in terms of Alzheimer's, begins its dysfunction. So we know, and when I say we, a lot of times I forget to characterize this, but when I say we, I know that we is the greater scientific community. We know that it is a degenerative disease. We know that we're losing neurons, we're losing brain mass, we're losing functionality, but what exactly are we really talking about when we say what is the characterization? What is Alzheimer's disease?
So early on, Alzheimer's disease was described as being a pathology in brain tissue, and that pathology are plaques and tangles. From that point on, though, we've now been able to associate symptomatology with pathology and where it's occurring in the brain. And many of us have been studying what's actually causing that pathology, and that's a subject of great debate at this point in time. In essence, what's happening is that the brain is changing, the structure and function is changing in the way that the process of learning and memory generation is actually being impacted at a very, very early point in the disease process. So as we age, all of us have issues with word searching, word finding, sometimes forgetting a name, not being able to remember something of that nature. But typically in aging, that's a normal process. In Alzheimer's disease, it becomes an abnormal process of the fact that your structure is damaged, so the function then is also limited. And someone, for instance, would be repeating themselves over and over, not realizing that they had already asked or answered a particular question or given a particular answer. So they will now go down a path where everything is essentially becoming new to them without a process of transferring the information into a memory, short-term memory. Long-term memory is maintained, interestingly enough, because of the storage capacity for long-term memory. So people can still have that process available to them and be able to now be triggered to remember something that they did in childhood, for instance. But of what they did 5 minutes ago or 10 minutes ago, they would not be able to remember that.
So it's not necessarily you're forgetting something. It's more, I've always attributed to you're lacking that connection between A and B.
Yes. So if you thought of it like telephone wires, yes, you've now clipped the wire between two telephone poles, and now you're not getting that connection. So things can come into the first telephone pole, but they can't get to the second, like you're saying, that A to B connection.
And it's not necessarily like the repetition that we see in neurodivergency, but it's something completely different. It's a lack of recognition of actually repeating. So it's a lack of cognition of the situation.
Correct.
It's a lack of cognition, but it's a lack of cognition of the cognition.
That's correct. That's a good way to put that, actually, too. And then from there, you'll start to see other changes in the brain as well, because other cells are being impacted by the disease process. So that's where you get like personality changes that can occur. Emotionality may actually become an issue as well, and part of that is because the amygdala in the brain, that area for fight and flight, and also development of emotional responses to things that you see in your environment, can be impacted as well. So that can now impact how emotions are processed. The prefrontal cortex, the frontal cortex, these are areas that also are impacted, so higher level executive functioning starts to be lost as well, and personality changes there too, due to loss of those cells and connections.
So we do have a question. Has there really been any research or connection noticed between untreated disorders like someone... So I know that it's difficult for people to get testing for ADHD and other neurodivergencies just because of the sheer volume of people now that seem to be asking that question. But has there been any connection between those neurodivergency disorders and potentially long-term effects like short-term memory loss or something of that nature?
To some extent, I would say yes. Those types of disorders have been looked at to see if they're increasing risk for going on to having a neurodegenerative process. And in some cases, I would say yes, there could be that risk of developing a neurodegenerative process from those disorders, because there are very similar or areas of the brain that are identical that are being impacted by those disorders that you would find in a neurodegenerative disease. But the change for like an ADHD or an epilepsy or some other type of obsessive compulsive disorder, bipolar disease, etc., those types of things are going to affect different areas of the brain, but they're not damaging the brain to the extent you would see in a neurodegenerative process. However, because you have changes in those areas over time, along with aging and other environmental insults and a genetic background, depending on what that is, could lead to a neurodegenerative process.
What about depression? Things like depression, anxiety. I know that they've kind of attributed depression and anxiety now to higher levels of cortisol in the brain. Does that have anything to do with the degenerative process, or does that make it easier for the degenerative process to occur?
Well, I would say there can be associations along with those, but it's hard to delineate in who that would happen for or with. And it's because how these manifest in an individual can be much different, even though we classify using big names of depression, anxiety disorder, etc. How those manifest in one individual versus another has a lot of variability to it. However, At times, we have noticed, though, that those areas of the brain that are showing change there, like neurons that make serotonin and involved with sleep and activation and depression, etc. Those are ones that could be affected also in Alzheimer's disease or other neurodegenerative conditions. So those nerve groups could still be vulnerable. Now, with another manifestation of a different process at an earlier point in time, earlier age, we don't know how that will translate per individual to something worse later on.
So it seems as though we know a lot about these topics, but it almost seems as though we're still just barely scratching the surface of a much more overly complicated organ system in the brain and the disease itself.
Yeah. Yes, we are.
I know that's a gross oversimplification.
The complexity here is quite significant. We're trying to figure out what are causative features of a particular disease in the brain. If we had trauma, for instance, we'd understand, okay, the causative feature of that is a trauma. If we had a tumor, we would know, okay, we could focus in that way. When we have neurodegenerative processes that are chronic in nature, it's very difficult to determine the point at which the insult was made, leading to the chronic damage, leading to the end result of neurodegeneration and now a disease designation. Because of that chronic nature, and often it's very subclinical. We're not getting a dramatic event that is now changing the brain. Like if you had a meningitis or encephalitis, some type of event that way, or like trauma, like I mentioned before, or a tumor, those are very specific, dramatic events that will affect the brain, and you'll recognize there's something wrong. So these other processes that come along with aging and this neurodegenerative change is really difficult to identify early. That's why we're looking for biomarkers in the body to see if we can find a biomarker at an early point in time to give us a predictability of who would go on to develop a neurodegenerative condition.
So one of the things that I know that a lot of people don't seem to have a very good grasp on is the actual process of scientists getting their information out there. One of the things that I've talked about multiple times on my stream is that scientists tend to be very guarded people. One thing that I discussed earlier, actually yesterday on stream, was the fact that, I don't want to talk about this idea because I don't want to get scooped. And
yes.
It almost makes you wonder whether scientists are actually excited to talk about their work. And I've said multiple times, we're kind of like that kid in the candy store. We really want to tell you almost every little thing. It's like being that fan of that one TV show, and you really want to talk about that all the time.
It's very true. We're typically very excited about the work we do. If the work is not published, though, this is where we run into that issue about scooping, is that if you have an idea, a hypothesis, that you feel is a really strong hypothesis about an issue of science, and you have not yet explored it to a point where you could publish it and put it into the public record, there is a fear that you would be scooped on that by mentioning that idea to other scientists, or just on even a social media site, where somebody could take that idea now and translate it into experimentation, get data, and publish it, because then they become the person or people that are now known as being the first to do that. So that goes back to your issue, Joe, about what you're talking about with being scooped. So many of us feel that we want to talk about our science that we've done and what we continue to do, as long as we have noted that we have planted the flag along the way, that we have now made this public declaration by publishing that this is now in the public record. Once that is there, the door opens and you can talk about that type of work without that fear of being scooped. Now, 20, 30, 40 years from now, someone may come along and do something very similar to what you've already done and think that they're the first to do it. However, if they look back into the records, which are now kept in the Library of Congress, in the National Library of Medicine, on the cloud, they would find that there's information that already existed about that topic. So, for instance, when we first published on the association of chlamydia pneumoniae, respiratory chlamydia, in Alzheimer brain tissues, I did a background searching to see if anyone else had published on that issue prior to our publication. And I couldn't find anything in any database to suggest that anyone had ever done this work or ever found this association. And by doing that, when we published, we now became known as the first group to plant that flag and be recognized as the people who first made this association and discovery.
So another thing that we were discussing on this topic. Oh, well, actually, excuse me. I have to read our chat here.
Okay.
So off of the idea, so going back to Alzheimer's, if you were to catch it early enough, is there really any preventative treatment as of yet? I've always, whenever somebody asks this question of me, I've always said, right now, the best thing that I can recommend to you is to just manage your diet, keep a relative level of exercise, and that's all I can really definitively say is going to kind of keep you going.
Yes.
At this point.
Well, and those are both really good aspects of what you would do early on. The other things there is that those are actually helping to keep your immune system actually primed as well. And the immune system is really key to many of these neurodegenerative processes, actually. Because what we find with neurodegenerative processes in general, and this goes to Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and frontotemporal dementias, Lewy body dementias, et cetera, is that inflammation is a big key to the damage that's occurring to the neurons in our brains. So keeping your immune system in check, where your immune system is healthy, it's picking up aspects of your environment so that it's constantly primed and capable now of maintaining a normal body functioning, is key to staying healthy overall systemically and in the brain. So the other thing I would add to that is that you have to minimize inflammation in the body over periods of time. And what's interesting here is that some early clinical trials were run where people had not developed Alzheimer's disease, but they were using anti-inflammatory drugs like the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs.
So like ibuprofen or aspirin or things like
correct.
that.
Fairly commonly to treat aches and pains. It was shown that those people seemed to have a delay in onset of any neurocognitive deficit as they got into older age. So it suggests that maintaining a level of diminishing inflammation in the body overall was a good thing. What's interesting is individuals that developed Alzheimer's disease or were diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease that then were put on anti-inflammatory trials or clinical trials using anti-inflammatories did not help them. So in some ways the horse had already left the barn and it was too late to intercede at that point in time. That's why we need to identify really up front what are the elements on board that actually will lead to neurodegeneration. And that is why we think, and what I've been studying for years and years now, is that infections that get into our bodies can actually lead to neurodegenerative processes. And that's why the last time I mentioned COVID as being a big issue here. And it's teaching us, it's teaching the globe now, the global population, that a virus can actually impact the nervous system along with the respiratory system and vasculature as well, the circulatory system. leading to even, in some cases, neurocognitive change. And that's why what I've been studying for a long period of time, also we've associated with neurocognitive change if these organisms can impact the brain. And I'm looking at more of the impact directly into brain tissue versus systemically. However, even systemic infections leading to a significant inflammatory response in the body in general can possibly affect change in the brain. So it becomes a more complicated issue there as to how inflammation is generated, leading to neurocognitive change.
And I know we've touched on this a few times, and you and I have touched on it a lot in private conversation and just in spitballing ideas. But right now, one of the major things that you and I are, and our research group as a whole, is really working on is trying to find that early marker to identify when it begins, how it begins, what thing we should be looking at. And that's not, and as we've discovered since your initial discovery, that's not a very easy question to answer. And and again, we touched on this last time, in my scientific career, I'm still basically in diapers. I've already noticed that just in simple questions. In fact, whenever I answer a question to most people on stream, it's just, well, there is no easy answer to that question. It's a lot of yes and it's a lot of no at the same time.
That's a good point. It's at times very difficult to really get very basic and say, okay, the following is what's happened in a particular individual. As far as the biomarker issues go, though, in essence, what we find in brain tissues allows us to work backwards. So when you see pathology, you want to understand, why is pathology there? When you see that you have infectious agents on board, for instance, or inflammation on board, you want to know why it's there. And this has led us to working backwards to trying to understand, well, if this is what we see as an endpoint, what would we see early on? What would we be able to measure in somebody's bloodstream, or somebody's saliva, or urine, or cerebrospinal fluid, to actually help us understand if those components are there in those fluid sites? Would it mean that now can be associated with the risk of these components now developing in our brains, and that by measuring them and seeing the differences in the peripheral areas of the body, could we predict that this is now going to lead to something in brains downstream? That's what we're trying to get to. So, for instance, as a practical matter, my proposal would be, okay, certain infectious agents have been found that can cause brain change, can have even been found in brain tissues. We need to monitor by mid-age of an individual, going up to probably the age of even 55 to 60, whether these people have these organisms, these infectious agents on board. Or if there's been recognition of them on board in those individuals. Because if there has been, then what we could do is potentially even treat with antivirals, antibacterials, antifungals, antiparasitics, to actually try to eradicate those particular organisms so that we minimize the possibility for them to impact brain change. So these are the aspects that we've been talking about of developing the clinical trials in this direction, to actually now see if we can lead to preventive processes here, so that people aren't getting demented or having neurocognitive change if they have these organisms on board. So if we recognize them early enough, we might be able to make that change. And I say it this way, that with aging, as we get into our 6th, 7th, 8th decades and beyond, our ability to have an immune system that can effectively monitor these agents that come into us or are on us, that we're exposed to prevent them from causing damage in our bodies, lessens over time. Because of it lessening, we are more subject to now having these changes as we age. That's why these neurodegenerative conditions are diseases showing up with older populations for the most part.
And, I think it goes without saying, I think you can almost read between the lines with what we've been kind of talking about over the past couple of minutes, is that we know a good deal about this ever since, I believe it was Dr. Alzheimer, correct? It wasn't Professor. I know that it's difficult sometimes the farther you go back, whether it's Professor or Doctor who figured it out. But if I'm not mistaken, when ever since Dr. Alzheimer's discovered this pathology, it has become more and more complex of a topic to discuss, to analyze, to research, the longer we look at the problem. It's almost kind of like you're staring into the abyss, and the abyss is now staring back at you at the same time.
It's true. And unfortunately, the focus has been on the pathology that Alzheimer actually identified in 1907. And it goes to the amyloid plaques and the tau tangles for the vast majority of studies out there that and groups and big pharma of how they've been trying to study the problem. And the idea there was that if you have these pathologies evolving in brain tissue, if you could diminish the accumulation of the proteins that form your amyloid and form your tau tangles, diminish them in the brain by removing them from the brain, that people would get better. Now, that's been their approach. The current approach is still being done that way, and the current drug that just was accepted by the FDA and approved by the FDA for treatment of some Alzheimer individuals actually is an antibody that will remove pieces of the amyloid protein from brain tissues of individuals that have Alzheimer's disease. The problem with that, though, is that you're taking out end products. After a process has evolved in brain tissues, you're now getting rid of basically what we consider to be the garbage that has now started to accumulate, and you're getting rid of that, thinking that that's going to improve the condition. Unfortunately, what's happened is there's been enough cellular damage already that there's going to be minimal or no improvement when you start doing this process. Now, early on, if you start using this approach when someone is first diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, the data that have been published suggests that there's a 27% reduction in cognitive decline when you use this antibody to get out of the amyloid out of the brain tissue. And that reduction in cognitive decline will last for about 6 to 18 months. Now, if you use an older drug, donepezil or Aricept, often same thing, which is based on a different type of activation in the brain. It's a drug that blocks an enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine. Okay, so it has a different mechanism of action. If you use that drug when first diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, you can delay progression in most individuals for about 6 to 18 months. A very similar type of delay is what we're talking about here with the older drug and now with this newer drug, even though this newer drug is only doing it for about 27% decrease in cognitive decline, which we're not even sure what that means overall. So many of us believe is that this is not the correct process to actually use in trying to really effectively treat an individual. By going after this pathology. We need to go after the insulting agents.
The causative agents.
The causative agents, that's correct. And that's why there's a whole group of us across the globe that think that causative agents here that are significant in this process are infectious agents that can now start the inflammatory process in brain tissues, leading to the pathology, and then obviously the designation of the disease.
And again, this touches what I was saying before, that this is a very complex problem. And the more we look at it, I called it the rabbit hole the one time that we were having a discussion, that the more I look at the problem, the more complex it gets and the farther I fall in. And yet you get caught off on tangents and you follow, because the literature is extensive on the topic. It is. And you could go down one path and find yourself at the end point, and you find out that it actually doesn't have anything to do with where you originally started. But that's the nature of journals.
Yes. True.
It's the nature of journal articles. So it makes me now ask a question that was brought up. Since scientists are in such a race to kind of be the first to the finish line, does that mean that you not necessarily you yourself, but does that mean that there's a lot of infighting, a lot of backstabbing amongst the scientific community, or as a whole, would you say that we've kind of gotten away from that overly ambitious and competitive nature that we may have once had at one point?
Well, I would actually say that we have a combination of both happening still. Part of it is that there are individuals out there that think that they want to be recognized as being the individual or group that is now correct and making the difference for this whole disease process. So there is that type of an approach that's very narrowed, focused in, not accepting other approaches because they think that this is the right way. Even though I think that infection and is aligned with inflammation, aligned with neurodegenerative disease, I look at it more broadly that it doesn't act alone. There are other factors here, genetic factors, other environmental factors that also are in play that would lead to this outcome of different individuals then having different infectious agents on board, leading to a neurocognitive problem. So we're trying to understand how that is aligned with Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative processes. So many of us feel that we need to do this in collaboration, and we need to do this open-ended, where we're sharing information. And we say this way, is that what matters to many of us is that we make a difference for the populations that are destined to either get Alzheimer's disease or already have it, and to do something about it that's realistic. And we don't care that we're recognized as being the first or the 100th in the process. It's a matter of making the difference. That's the key. And as far as making money on it and going for specific drugs and coming out with unique drug that you can make thousands of dollars on per dosage, that's not something that we're focused on. Pharma obviously is focused on that, and they're a business. I'm an academic. I look at it the purity of science, of purity of understanding the problem, of making the difference that way. If we have an existing drug we could use, great. If we have to develop a new drug, we can do that as well based on the understanding. But it comes down to making the difference. So that's been our approach, and many of my colleagues' approaches as well to that. There are different camps, though, that want to stay within their own camp and do not want to accept what we've done. We accept what most people are doing because we have a lot of really smart people doing science. And all these findings that people come up with are really important to total understanding. It's like building your jigsaw puzzle and completing all the puzzle pieces in the jigsaw puzzle. So we believe all of that's important. I would mention, though, if you take all the information and put it on an equal plane, all the information has been generated in the field of Alzheimer's disease research, put it on an equal plane, so the equal footing, so that not one piece of information is more important than another. If you do that, you can all of a sudden come to this idea that Occam came up with a long time ago, called Occam's razor, of taking all this information, equal footing, the simplest explanation is going to be correct. So this goes down to now almost a common sense issue here of biology. What is the biology? What's the common sense understanding of this biology? And this is where inflammation comes in and what's generating inflammation. We know that infectious agents in and on us are the greatest source of generating inflammation in the human body. And that's why that is so important to us, and we think that's the way to understand the problem.
Interesting. So let me ask you this. Would you say that if in a certain way, and I know that, every scientist has their own opinion of how journals are and how journals can kind of almost be gatekeepers of knowledge that is available. Would you say that if all knowledge was actually put on the same plane, meaning it all stood up at the same level, do you think it would be easier for scientists as a whole to come to a consensus on things, or do you think it would make it almost that much more difficult because everyone is able to shout at the same volume?
Well, in some ways, if by doing that, the answers become clearer, given all the information, the answers become clearer, I think you can accept the answers more readily, so that no matter who's hollering about that, it becomes more of the understanding of the real problem. Okay, and with that understanding, that's where the real differences can be made to either prevent, treat, or cure the particular problem, whatever it is. And I think that's where we need to get to, because it's all about, in my estimation, about figuring out the real aspects of a problem and then using that information to actually change the outcome. And we're doing it in all kinds of fields, not just Alzheimer's disease and brain disease, with cancer, with arthritis, with gastrointestinal diseases, etc. We're getting to a point where we're able to use more of this information and start to equalize it, because it's all important information. And what would be more important versus less important? That's hard to figure out. It's hard for us to assign that type of level of importance to one thing versus another. And that goes to the complexity of the issue, even though the complexity of the issue could be understood by looking at the simplest explanation of the complex issue.
I mean,
Does that make sense?
That's kind of the nature of the beast of a complex issue. It's not easy. And there are some people who would say that if the problem was easy, I wouldn't want to do it because it's too easy.
Or we'd solve it quickly and move on.
Yes.
Well, and that's like saying, okay, well, if we know that a strep organism can cause strep throat, then we can take an antibiotic and kill the organism and get rid of strep throat.
Right.
Okay. So it's a very direct, almost a black and white approach to the problem, but that didn't come about without an understanding, though, of how infectious agents like that could cause strep throat.
Right.
Okay, and before the days of antibiotics, we couldn't treat that way. So it all is a continuum of understanding, and then using that understanding as we keep moving forward.
Right. So one of the things that I've seen, at least in terms of research, is that there seems to almost be kind of two camps of people. And I don't know if this is because of publish or perish, or if this is because of poor working relationships or something, but it seems like there are some scientists who are open to collaboration all over the world, wherever it be, whether it's the neighbor down the hall or the neighbor, across the world. But then there are others who tend to kind of almost only pay attention to their little group and only reference in their research their little group. What's the benefits and what's the detriments to those two situations?
Well, I think if you're just within your own group and you're only associated with a small number of people, it's fixed on a particular problem, whatever the problem might be. I think it's limiting to overall understanding, because it's like you have a group that is all agreeing with one another.
Yeah.
You need at times dissent and debate to actually give you a better perspective of what the problem is. And that's a healthy type of an approach. So when you have collaborations, which is what I like to do, is collaborate with a lot of different people, hear what they have to say, hear the feedback, hear the arguments for and against. This goes to like argumentation. Can you argue using data and understanding and facts to make a point about something? And is it debatable? And just about everything is debatable because different people see those facts and information from a little bit of a different view. So that's a healthy kind of interchange. So by collaborating and hearing different thoughts and trying to understand from other points of view, it actually strengthens your approach to understanding the problem.
So when I was a student, now granted, when we're all students, we all make jokes about our faculty. But when I was a student, we used to make the joke that if you put 5 scientists and locked them in a room, they'd all kill each other, and they would all think that they were right in the process. So would you say that it's almost good to have discussion, but also to have someone almost play the devil's advocate with your theorem, your idea, your project, to kind of almost test the waters, or to test the strength of the dike, if you will?
Well, it's interesting, Joe, that you say this too, because it goes to what we call the null hypothesis, is that you're actually trying to prove yourself wrong when you're doing your work. So you have a finding, and all of a sudden you're trying to say, okay, well, if I see this problem this way, is it real? Is it something that I can repeat? Is it something that I can use different techniques to understand? Is it an anomaly that, like a red herring in the process, where I shouldn't even be going down this pathway because there's not something that is really understandable? And so in that regard, I think that over time, when you're doing science, you're really trying to understand what it is that you found, and you're trying to understand it from all different views. And by doing that, as you now have different techniques that you're using, and those techniques are demonstrating to you that, yes, this finding is holding up. It actually is being validated by different methodologies or by different laboratories even to do this and find things that you've found, then it strengthens the whole process. That's something that is really concrete. It's something you can touch. It's something that becomes real, and not just something that is a flash in the pan type of finding, or something that you thought there was something there, but it's not really there.
So I've always tried to stress this to young students, students that we have here, anyone who has ever said to me, I like the idea of science. I always kind of look at them and I say, it is by far one of the most rewarding things I have ever done. But by the same token, it has also been one of the biggest detriments on my health. It's been one of the biggest detriments on my mental health. It's been one of the most frustrating things that I've ever done. But the highs are very high, and by the same token, it's almost like the lows are very low. Like these discussions that we have whenever we talk about Alzheimer's, it's a very complicated issue. What keeps a scientist going for you? I mean, you've done this much longer than I have. You have much more experience in this. I know that there have been times where I've sat there and been like, my God, am I in the right position here? Am I in the right, job for myself? Have you ever had those moments where you've just kind of like questioned everything?
Well, it's interesting you ask that question. Along the way, I think in the learning process, as we continue to learn, by the way, I'm still a student of understanding of these problems, of the studying what I study. You never stop being a student.
Yeah.
Okay, so even though I'm much older than you and I've been doing this longer, I'm still a student of the process of understanding and working through the problem, trying to figure out how to solve it. What's interesting is along the way, there are times where people will not agree with you, or that there are designations of, you're wasting your time going in a certain direction, or why would you even consider studying the problem in a certain way? And this goes to then a confidence that we all need to have, and a commitment to seeing problems through. In other words, of actually committing yourself to working on a problem and being open-minded to that yes, what you find in association with a problem may not be the 90% correct issue to the problem. It could be, but it may not be. But it could be 5% correct or 1% correct. And even with that, it's adding knowledge into the bowl of science here of understanding the problem. And we need to do that. So you have to maintain a level of confidence in what you're doing, even when you're facing adversity from other scientists, or not getting funded, or feeling that you're spinning your wheels at times. And it comes down to a dedication and a commitment and a desire to see it through. And that's what I've determined to do. Now, everybody has a different view of things. But I look at it this way, that I have an ability to do this. So I'm going to use this until I don't have that ability anymore. So while I'm still on the planet, I'm going to approach it this way and keep going to solve the problem. And my hope is that everything we're doing is now adding to solving the problem, is now and getting close. And I think we are actually getting close to solving this problem, getting greater acceptance as to what our findings and other findings have been with the causation of Alzheimer's disease, and maybe these other dementing illnesses and neurodegenerative diseases as well. So I think I'm excited about this at this point in time, because I think there's a great upheaval. It's almost like this groundswell, an activation energy that it's being put into these directions that I've been working on for years, that actually will now come ashore. If you're talking about like a big wave coming into shore,
it's validating.
It's now coming in, and okay, it's arrived.
It's validating.
So now it's validated, right? So we're getting very close to that.
A warrior asks, have you ever had a situation where you published and then had someone else blow holes in your theory or in a subsequent paper? If I can preface this a little bit, one of the things that I thought was an excellent preparational lesson was one of my instructors, when we were getting ready for a symposium at our institution, she would prep us by doing something that she called murder boarding, which is you put up your poster, everyone in the class goes up there, and then the object is to find as many holes as humanly possible and to bring them up in front of you right there in front of the rest of the group so that you lose that emotional knee-jerk reaction. So my answer to this statement is all the bloody time, and it can be very constructive when framed in the proper way. Now, I know in my experience, there are certain researchers out there whose ego is bigger than the entire galaxy that we currently exist in, and they just live for the chance to tear someone apart. And given this question, could you just give us some of your perspective on this?
Yeah, so I have encountered that as well. Even with our own work, when we first published on infection and Alzheimer's disease, there were some other people that wanted to come out with quick what I call a quick and dirty approach to trying to replicate the information we had come out with. And that quick and dirty approach led to a number of, and there were 3, maybe 4, reports of not being able to find what we had found in Alzheimer brain tissues with the chlamydia pneumoniae story. However, then there were reports of other individuals, independent of us, that didn't even know about this happening, of other people actually finding what we found as well. Now, this goes to how science is actually done and whether or not you can take different approaches at times to answering the same question or finding the same information. And it depends on how the science is done. We went out of our way to use 6 and 7 different techniques when we first published our work on infection and Alzheimer's disease. Others were using one technique that they were using in their laboratory, thinking that that would be enough to replicate what we had done. And we questioned their techniques, that if you want to replicate, follow what we've done, and use the same techniques, use the same sources of antibodies and primers for molecular analysis, etc., and you will find what we found. And most of those people that had negative reports didn't do it that way. So it goes to how do you do your science and the replicability of it. Knowing that others did replicate by doing something more similar to what we did, and then having these reports get published over time, strengthens the validation argument and replication argument that we kept arguing about, is that this is actually real. It's how you're doing your science. And so if you can do it the way we did it, using techniques that are well known, well established, but using multiple techniques to reassure that what you're finding is real, you will find this organism in Alzheimer brain tissues.
So when you're researching something, have you ever had to completely backtrack on something that you've published before? Not necessarily because you did something wrong, but new information has come that kind of changes the idea in a way that now what you had already previously done no longer actually makes sense.
Well, knock on wood, I can't think of an instance where what we have done we've ever had to backtrack on. It's led to information in the literature for other scientists to use to understand the problem. In fact, most of what we've done has been built upon even using what our findings are. In some cases, there was a paper that came out about 2 years ago that took our findings and used a theoretical approach to demonstrate how chlamydia pneumoniae, which we've been publishing on, and what we have noticed is it can get through our olfactory system, our sense of smell system in our noses, into the brain of animals, and we think that's happening in humans as well. They did a theory paper on this and came out with basically an algorithm, a biological algorithm of how this organism could actually cause Alzheimer's disease. And we've been saying this prior to this paper coming out, but we've been saying it for a number of years that this is how we think it's working. And they, through this algorithm approach, actually were able to really declare that, yes, this is very likely a way that Alzheimer's disease could manifest in individuals that get infected this way.
So, in terms, I want to preface this with, in terms of how discourse goes, in terms of journal article, most scientists, at least as far as I've seen, we kind of have this unwritten understanding that we try and keep personal emotion as far away from that as humanly possible, because, again, it's like what we said last time, the data is the data. Correct. We kind of try our best to allow the data to speak for itself as much as possible. In terms of the way that we write certain things and we reference our interpretations of certain people's articles, yes, A warrior, we can sometimes become passive aggressive in our way of referencing each other. Kind of, it's, I would say, even though it might be passive aggressive, it's still polite. It's kind of this
What is most annoying for me, and I think other scientists, is when our work is referenced in someone else's review paper.
Ugh.
And this becomes a problem because it's the review paper now that gets noticed in a particular article as being the reference for work that was done by other people, where the other people have now the original article was published, okay, and that's not being cited.
Right.
So that goes to almost an ignorance in moving forward with an understanding of where was this work published, who did this work, and how was it done.
Yeah.
Because if it's just referenced in a review article by people that didn't do the work, they just picked up a paper and read about it and said, okay, I'm going to write a review on this topic, without actually understanding the background of the problem, etc. And they get cited for that.
Yeah.
It's diminishing the contribution that we as originators, as discoverers, as the explorers that did find something that should be recognized in that category. So it diminishes then that understanding or that recognition.
One thing that I think kind of has gone by the wayside that almost has limited us as a community is we as scientists used to spend our entire careers researching something, and very rarely would we ever publish anything until the very end of our careers, where, as the old saying goes, save it until you write your book. It almost makes you wonder if we as scientists at the very end of our careers should almost collect our work, the body of our work, and almost write a book saying, this is what I found, here's my characterization of it, and then you can almost reference it later on. Reference your own articles as you went through the process.
Well, so with publication, the way I've always looked at it is it's incumbent on us when we find something to try to publish that. And why I say that is so that other scientists and the public and the funding agencies, etc., can see something that's been done by this group, but also to help in moving and understanding the problem forward, so that you can now use the information at a point in time that could be helpful the next year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road to actually solving the problem.
Right.
If you continue to hold on to the information without publishing it, waiting for that book, then it actually is limiting, because you could get to that point in time and write the manifesto of a book that is now answering the question. But what have you done up to that point to make a difference for the population that something where something could have been occurring prior to writing that book?
Right.
Okay, with that same information. So that's where I differ with that a little bit.
Absolutely.
I think it's important, though, at the end of careers, hopefully, to write, though, like a compilation of what it is that you've done, to now show how...
Right, that's kind of what I was getting at.
Yeah, this information now can be compiled that way.
It's almost like how in older sitcoms you'd get the clip show episode, where they would show you little tidbits of what has already happened, almost as a way of like keeping you up to date, because you and I, we remember those days, but there are some people who don't, where you got one chance to watch that episode, and maybe you were lucky to see it in the summertime when reruns were going on. Maybe.
That's true.
Nowadays, we can just pop something on and catch it whenever we need to. So it almost makes you wonder if, and this kind of goes on to what we were talking about before, if there was no fear of scooping, and you could almost discuss your findings whenever you wanted to, do you think it's better to wait until the end of a project to publish in that regard, or do you think it's better to constantly, give people updates? Or by that constant update, are you diminishing from the overall message as a whole?
Well, that's a good question. I think that if we didn't have to worry about scooping or the funding that we always struggle to get to keep going with the work, science is an expensive process, obviously. If we didn't have to worry about that, I think that putting data out there on a continuum, as the data comes in from a laboratory, throwing it out there and let people look at that data and say, okay, I'm finding this now. Here you can digest this and see how it fits with the overall story or the overall problem that we're trying to solve, would be the best way to go.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's the most practical way to go, actually. And we're still limited by the ability to fund science as a whole, and to allow people to and enable people to continue on doing their work. And this is where it goes down to, then you have to have something concrete to use to support.
Yeah.
That's already been accepted in the public, by the public domain, I say.
Yeah.
So that's where publishing is important, but having that data to publish and making sure that there's almost like a credit. I mean, so this person's getting credit, this other person's getting credit. It doesn't go to ego either. It goes to now the ability then to demonstrate that you're capable of doing this work. And that's often what you need to demonstrate to individuals that want to fund your work, that you can actually do it, and you can get data and you can publish it, and demonstrate that you're making progress on a problem.
So we do have a question, and that's, can you think of any open source science that has happened in the past? The only way that I can think of this is that, all science in a way is kind of open source, but I know what they're getting at. It's almost like being able to just pull down and either grab that information early or contribute to it easily in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, there are a couple of open source databases, actually, that you can put your data into.
Yeah.
I just don't know enough about how that's being used on my end. Okay. I think there are individuals that are using that. They're putting data into an open source. It's being recognized. They are being assigned so that they know the data is coming from a particular group or individual.
The rights to the information is being attributed to the people that is discovered.
Correct. But it is not considered to be something that is a publication.
Yes.
That I know of at this point in time, that could be used to demonstrate that, okay, you've now addressed a problem, you studied it, you now have published on it, now you're on to the next level, or the next chapter of your work that you're working on.
So one thing that you touched upon a little bit earlier is the funding. And I know from personal experience, because I tend to do the books for my labs, science is an extremely expensive process, even more so when you're on the cutting edge of something. And how difficult is it to actually get funding for a research topic? I know how it works, but could you elaborate a little bit for our audience?
Yeah, I would say it's difficult. And I say it this way, and I mentioned this the last time we met as well, last week, that typically the National Institutes of Health is the biggest funder of academic science in the U.S. And the National Institutes of Health, there are many different institutes, depending on designations like the National Institute on Aging, the National Institute on Heart, Lung, and Blood, etc., National Cancer Institute. Those institutes are given a certain amount of money per institute to fund certain amounts of work. So when we apply to, for instance, I'd apply to the National Institute of Aging. The National Institute of Aging and a couple of other institutes also affiliated with the brain studies has a pool of money designated for Alzheimer's disease research. It's gone up to about $3.5 billion. You would think, oh, that's a tremendous amount of money. However, the work that I do, here's a perspective. The work that I do on infection and Alzheimer's disease, there has been $6 million of that $3.5 billion allocated to funding grants on infection and Alzheimer's disease. That's a fraction of what is needed in an arena of this type of study to solve this problem of infection and Alzheimer's disease. It is basically, it's considered to be a drop in the bucket of what's really needed to make the difference. The vast majority of those monies are going to projects on amyloid and tau and ApoE epsilon 4, on other aspects that are important aspects to study of Alzheimer's disease. But the amount of money is so different into these different arenas that makes it very difficult for we who are studying something that we think is going to make a great difference to actually have a continuum of monies coming into our laboratories to do the work. So I've found ways of circumventing that, of having philanthropy money for my laboratory. People that are interested to see how we're doing our work and what we're doing and seeing this through. I'm the director of our Center for Chronic Disorders of Aging. I have a small budget from that on a yearly basis to help fund aspects of Alzheimer's disease that we're doing as well, and other chronic disorders of aging, actually. So we find ways of getting money, but it's very limiting. The other thing I mentioned last week was that there are about 60,000 grants that are submitted to the NIH each year. Actually, I should say, this could be even at each cycle. I don't know that for sure. But there are typically 3 cycles of grants coming into the NIH every quarter of the year. But there's 60,000 overall that come in. I think it's during the year. About 20,000 get funded. You're talking about 40,000 grants, 40,000 groups that are not getting funded through the NIH. So that is very limiting as to being able to do your work. Now, others, I'm sure, are doing what I do, is find other ways of funding the work through other philanthropy, through donations, through their institutions, etc. And through collaboration. This is also another reason why we have to collaborate, is to sort of get a multitude of individuals involved with doing work that sometimes one individual of the group will get funded and help the others of the group as well. That's a perspective, though, on what we're dealing with here in doing modern science.
So you mentioned philanthropy as a source of funding. I was going to touch on that in a next question, almost a devil's advocate. One of the discipline outside your own, have you found yourself? Oh, well, I'll get to that soon. Is there a danger to getting philanthropy money? So is there a danger to almost being beholden to that person that's offering you that funding?
I don't find that to be a danger. And I say that because what I do, the science I do, is what needs to be funded. And if someone is coming to me and interested in funding that, I said, okay, this is what I have, this is what I do, and this is what needs to be funded. It doesn't go to anything. I have no guarantees of what I'm going to find or not find. I can't do that. I can't. As a scientist, it's useful for projects. Okay, so what is the project? If the project is that I'm going to study, for instance, infection in a cell culture model, and I now need money to do this, then I describe it that way. This is what, and whatever I find, I find. Now, always what we do though is if we get monies that way, and I have gotten monies that way, is to cite the source of the monies. As in your acknowledgments, when you publish on this work or when you present this work anywhere, you actually cite that source. So you give credit to the people that are actually supporting your work. And that's what we do continually and all the time and there's no doubt that that happens.
Yeah. So this is a little bit off topic, but what other discipline outside of your own have you found yourself learning to further your own research?
Well, what's interesting here is that I have a background in microbiology, pathology, neuropathology, neuroscience, neurobiology, cancer. And I have used elements of all of that knowledge, of all those disciplines, in the research that I do. For instance, aspects of training in understanding of different cancers, the molecular approaches that are taken there, looking at different genes and then different proteins, etc., and different molecules, nucleic acid molecules. We have used that information to study the problem we're looking at with Alzheimer's disease. An example is looking at microRNAs and also with trauma of the nervous system, and looking at microRNAs that we can actually detect in saliva, and how those microRNAs are affiliated with inflammation, for instance, how those also fit with inflammation we find in Alzheimer's disease. So there are crossovers with disciplines and also approaches that we take to understand the problem we're working on.
So, what would you say is one of the larger hurdles that a scientist will generally encounter in the process of completing their project, other than the obvious, which is the difficulties in getting an experiment to be successful or the difficulties in finding the result? Where's that big limiting factor? Is it the funding? Is it the interpretation?
I have found the most limiting factors for us have been, and this isn't necessarily in order, but limiting factors would be funding, personnel, having enough people actually to work on the problem, enough students, enough postdocs, enough research staff to work on the problem, so that the experiments can be done in a timely fashion, data collected, and then put into a manuscript, a paper to be published. So when you have limits of any of those, it takes more time to do your experiments, to get your data. Also, it can also depend on your experimental design.
Yeah.
For instance, what you're working on now, Joe, with the animal model. The animal models take a longer period of time because you're looking at behavior, you're looking at infection, you're looking at now a process over months, and you're collecting data over that amount of time, and you'll get to an endpoint, but it could take 6, 9, 12 months in order to get to the endpoint. So depending again on what the question you're asking and the models you're using, the experimental design, it can be very limiting.
Yeah. So, I know for many people that are not affiliated with science, there's this perception of exactly how we are and what we do with our day to day. And I always preface whenever somebody asks me what it is that I do day to day, and I always say you really have to lower your expectations almost to zero. Simply because, and we kind of touched on this a little bit last time, it's almost mundane on the day-to-day. And you had mentioned before, pulling yourself away to look at the problem as a larger sense and looking at it in a much smaller sense. How would you characterize the day-to-day of science?
The day-to-day of science is a grind. That's how I would characterize it. You have to sort of be committed to evaluation of your experiments, of your data that you have, of finding references, of looking at emails that are coming in, of individuals that want to line up a meeting to discuss science, collaboration, your findings. Today I had emails coming from a group that wants me to come out and give a talk to at a residential facility. But there's an interest there of hearing what's the latest on Alzheimer's disease. So I have to address that email. I had 2 Zoom calls that were lined up today. I met with Joe and other collaborators earlier today.
We're talking about
to talk about another project. I've printed out a number of papers. I've been contacted by a relative to investigate an issue with cancer and a particular type of mutation. I have sitting on my desk currently 10 grants from the Infectious Disease Society of America that I have to review in the next 2.5 weeks.
Sounds pretty slow for a Tuesday.
Which I'll be getting to. I've been to my lab. I've talked to my graduate student. I've talked to my research staff member from my lab about what currently is happening in the lab. These are the typical things. I have to lecture as well at times, so I'm looking at certain lectures that I have to give that would be coming up this month. This is what a scientist does. This is what a professor does, a scientist does, researcher, and it varies from day to day. And more input could be put into, like, for instance, the grants I have to review. It may take me 4 to 6 hours to review an individual grant to make sure that I'm giving that grant its due so that I can know whether it should be and recommend whether it should be funded or not. So I take it very seriously that we're doing that. And I'm working on my own manuscript, not my own grant at this point in time, but that could be coming up as well. A manuscript, a consensus manuscript of collaborators across the globe. So we're currently working on that. It's almost finished, but we aren't quite there yet. It's going to take another couple of weeks. So we are continually moving forward on different issues that confront us on a daily basis, and then overall too, that we have planned out over time.
I'm sad to disappoint one of our audience members because she says that if my wake-up alarm isn't the tone to Bill Nye the Science Guy, she's going to be disappointed. And unfortunately, no. I used to wake up to an air raid siren because my father used to say I sleep like the dead. So I kind of need to be jostled awake as much as possible. So sadly, no. Bill Nye the Science Guy is not technically in my life as much as he was when I was, let's say, an elementary school student. But we do have another question. How does the day-to-day of science compare to, say, the academic experience?
The academic experience is one that obviously is a demand in what I do with teaching and active learning sessions. So teaching lectures, doing active learning sessions, counseling students, dealing with departmental issues at times, etc. So that's sort of the academic part. The science part is really where the love of being in academia comes from. Now, I love teaching as well, but I love doing science and finding different elements of the problem solving. So I really am a problem solver, and that's really where I fit in with the love of doing what I do. So it's sort of that combination. With academia, you have to be involved with service to your community, to your educational process and to your scholarly activity. So all of that fits together. But in my estimation, solving Alzheimer's disease is imperative, and it is the most important aspect of what I do in my role here.
No, it's very interesting. You know, one of the things that I do enjoy in the lab is being able to share my perspective on science, and to a certain extent, even the perspective that I have as a recipient of the healthcare industry with some of the students that we have here. Because some of them, I don't want to say that they have a delusion of what life is going to be like outside of the classroom, but it's almost to kind of shatter that potential misconception that students can sometimes have as to what they perceive their work will be eventually. And there are some students that are extremely receptive to it, but then there are other students that almost completely reject the fact that we would have any idea what their life outside of the classroom is going to be like. Have you ever encountered something like that? I mean, there's always going to be good and bad students, but has an interaction similar to that ever kind of like stuck with you?
Well, we've had over the years, we've had a number of people that have come into our lab and worked with us, and then have gone on to fields in neuro for the most part, but in many different fields as well. So they've gone on into medicine in different ways, but our hope is that we've generated an interest with what we've done and how they will go out and now actually practice medicine. What we offer here is a training for students in really critically reasoning, taking hypotheses, really looking at medicine and science as something you can both use together to actually now practice medicine. There are individuals, though, that don't want anything to do with like a wet laboratory where you would actually do experiments in a laboratory.
You mean my home?
In essence, yes. And they aren't interested in that because either because it's too time consuming, or that they don't want to focus that way. They just want to focus on learning didactic information, thinking that that will be enough for their practice of medicine. Many of us believe that it is not enough in modern medicine to not have an understanding of and a practical experience with research, to understand how to use it in a practice of medicine, of how to take findings and read scientific articles, pick up a journal and say, okay, what is the information there? How can I use it in my practice of medicine? What's the latest and greatest now that I need to know in moving forward? For instance, it's like constantly monitoring the FDA. What's the latest drug being approved for a particular problem? And then how could I use that in my practice when I'm dealing with the patients out there? So there has to be an interchange here and an understanding from a student's perspective of what it is that we do in science, along with how it helps you understand medicine better and be able to practice medicine.
I know that we had touched on the null hypothesis at one point. And I know that in research, you kind of develop at the very beginning. It's not necessarily a hypothesis anymore. The idea of the hypothesis kind of comes later. I almost want to say that most scientists don't have a hypothesis. We have an idea of what we think is going on, and we don't formulate the hypothesis until the very end, basically. One professor I had almost said that the hypothesis is only for the journal writing process, and you're basically going to be changing your idea probably 100 times. Would you say that the hypothesis as a whole, or the idea, the question, evolves organically, or is it something that you almost take back to the tool shed and start fresh regularly?
Well, I'm a firm believer that science is still done through serendipity and observation. And this is where the serendipity comes in. You have to be observant. You have to have your eyes open, your mind open to whatever it is you're studying. And I've always been one who observes something and then tries to experiment and see if something is there. Something, it tells me something if I develop an experiment around that observation of what could that tell me. And that happens much before, as Joe was saying, a hypothesis is actually developed. Because your observations give you an indication of what the reality might be. And your hypothesis is basically just making a statement about that potential reality, whether it's true or false. So you don't know up front whether it's true or false. But it is really the observation through serendipity that allows you to discover, to make that initial inroads into a scientific question or a problem. And then through designs of experiments and working on trying to understand that, you really delve deeper. And if your data is consistent, you have a finding or findings that are supporting one another, you keep going forward with that. So it's like building blocks. You're building blocks from a foundation, and then you keep building upon that foundation until now you have a whole tower built. And it comes down to that it had to start somewhere. But again, I really emphasize that you have to be curious, and you need serendipity to really understand and go down paths that give you an understanding of knowledge and generation of knowledge.
No, it's oh boy. I'm sorry, I just looked at the time. The time really does pass by during this. It's currently 4 of 6. I know last week you had a class to teach, but this week I believe that your time is a little more unhurried.
Correct.
So how do you feel that scientists should outreach to their communities? Because you did touch on it at one point that in academia there is more community outreach that needs to be done.
Yes.
So how as we as scientists could we potentially, in your eyes, be a little more open to that outreach?
Well, I've always been open to outreach. So I've given talks and have gone to community settings from anywhere from elementary schools and high schools to colleges to like the residential facility I'm going to in March, to also doing webinars through Zoom, usually, the scientists through Facebook. There are many different avenues of where I am willing to talk about the work we do so that the public, everyone understands the perspective of what it is and how important it is. And that's what I talk about. It comes down to that I think we need to continually get the information out there or help explain the information that's coming out from the FDA or coming out from different journal articles of what it actually means. Because as a scientist, I recognize that we have our own jargon. It's like a different language.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of times the understanding is not there by the public. And a perfect example of that is some of these commercials that the pharmaceutical firms put on television. They talk about, there's one drug that talks about treating multiple sclerosis. And then they say something about that you have to be careful because one of the adverse effects is that an individual could develop PML. Well, I turn to my wife often, who is not a scientist, and I say to her, honey, do you understand what PML is? And she goes, I have no clue what PML is. Okay, PML is progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy. I know that.
I'm sorry. Hold on.
As a
What?
It is a type of process that a drug to treat multiple sclerosis can actually generate a worse problem in those individuals, where it leads to breakdown of the white matter or the myelin that coats the axons in the brain more extensively than is what's happening with multiple sclerosis. It actually gives you a worse disease. Okay, but most people don't understand what that PML stands for.
I didn't,
but
I'm a scientist.
Right, it goes to the jargon though, and
Yeah.
using acronyms like that, etc. And this is a problem that we have in communication, and we need to better communicate. So I take it to heart to communicate, or try to communicate as best I can with what it is we do and what things mean, so that we have a better understanding of, oh, now I understand how a process would work.
Back when my wife and we don't watch TV as much anymore. We spend most of our time watching YouTube, and it's more targeted ads that we get these days. But back when we used to watch regular, cable television, we used to almost have a game whenever a pharmaceutical commercial would come on, because you're almost waiting for the other shoe to drop, and they say them in such a lower volume and it's such a speed that you almost don't get it. And one of our audience made the correct joke. Side effects may include spontaneous combustion, death, and flesh melting, because it almost seems like that at times.
It does.
This is unfortunately one of the negative aspects of the drug developmental process is that these pharmaceutical companies, I used to do the same thing. Used to try and memorize and keep up with the side effects. But the pharmaceutical companies aren't necessarily inherently evil. They're not inherently mean. They're trying to. It's a business, and they're trying to recoup the cost that it was to generate that drug. Unfortunately, we have some very poor examples these days. We have some companies taking over smaller companies and then tripling the price of an insulin shot, or mutating the intended process for certain things and using a drug for an unintended purpose simply because in 1 in 4 people they found that it had this side effect that is potentially beneficial.
Yeah.
I almost think to what was the compound, sildenafil, and how it was originally supposed to be a blood pressure medicine. It was supposed to help people with hypertension, high blood pressure, and it was supposed to lower their blood pressure to the point that they would be able to have a normal life. Well, its unintended side effect, which any scientist in the room could have probably told them would have potentially happened when you thin the mix of the blood, was Viagra, and that's what we have today. And they saw the easiest way to recoup the money that they had invested into this drug. And to my knowledge, it's still, in a way, prescribed for certain cases of hypertension, if I'm not mistaken.
It can be.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a study with Alzheimer's disease, I believe fairly recent, showing that individuals on sildenafil, Viagra, actually have increased blood flow into the brain, and that it actually is helpful, that it improves cognition.
Well, you were talking about these garbage compounds, so increased blood flow would almost help to kind of cycle that garbage out a little bit easier.
Yeah, and also the thought is that aerobic exercise, which also would lead to increased blood flow, is one of the best things you can do in older age as well. Keep moving, basically. Keep that blood flowing. That's the probably one of the better things you can do to maintain a better cognition.
Mm-hmm.
There was something. Oh, I know what I was going to mention was when you were mentioning the pharmaceutical company. So often with their commercials now, they say, "Talk to your doctor about."
Right.
Okay. So the rationale for that is that a number of years ago, the pharmaceutical companies were banned from sending sales reps to doctors' offices. Mm-hmm. Okay, so now what are they doing? They're telling the population.
They're using the patient to be the sales rep.
Correct. To go in and say, oh, yeah, mention to your doctor that Skyrizi is going to be used, or whatever.
Right.
Right? And that, ask them about that. Even
was
if it had nothing to do with them.
That was around the time of the OxyContin backlash, was it not?
I think so.
Yeah. And, again, this is kind of the funny thing, because if you talk to some of the scientists about these drugs that they've worked on, they already knew that this was a possibility. And it's not necessarily that they were willfully ignored. Again, these are businesses. They have to recoup a cost because, again, the next drug that comes up in the line could be that drug that they have to produce en masse, and they need the capital to do so. So I'm not trying to be an apologist for certain things, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give them the benefit of the doubt, because they're not just that evil person sitting on a mountain of money trying to just constantly make more money. There are some really good people in those corporations trying to make a difference. It just so happens that we hear that laundry list of side effects every single time a new drug comes out.
It's very true. And we need many of these drugs. I mean, they can be very helpful for large percentages of our population, obviously. And it's not to say that the drugs are not good.
Yeah.
It comes down to that, or that, big pharma, yes, it's a business, and they're putting out drugs that are going to help people, okay?
Yeah.
They make a lot of money on this.
Yes.
Okay. A lot of money that they're using for their own research, their own companies, or funding research, etc. So research and development there is a big issue for them.
Right.
And they, that's how they evaluate.
And a lot of times, and I do feel that I need to mention this, all of the research that we do in academia has to be published in the public eye. Meaning, even though you might not have full access to the article because of a paywall or whatever, you as the populace, we technically in a way work for you, and we present you with our work in the form of that journal article. Pharmaceutical companies don't have to do that at all. In fact, they get all of the benefit that you do at none of the cost, because those larger journals, they kind of want to pump them with more articles and say, here you go. In fact, they do a lot of the replicative studies, but they don't publish the results of those replicative studies. So it's almost a double-edged sword, sadly. It's the dog that bites you every time you feed it. It's sad, but at the same time, it's an entity that we as a society now, we can't live without, unfortunately. There is much that we wish we could change, but to a certain extent, like I said, they're not evil people by nature. They want to make the world a better place, but we have to do what we have to do, and unfortunately, money makes the world go round.
Yeah, true.
It's currently 6:07, and I know that you and I could pretty much go all night.
Probably.
I said it last week, and I'll say it again. It's absolutely wonderful having you on these live streams, and one of our
my pleasure.
Audience said it. You're now reaching the gaming community that's on Twitch, because that's what I do normally on my Twitch channel. But the beauty about and you can ask that question. Don't you worry. I'm just tying it all up. One of the beautiful things that we have here is that we're able to kind of reach things these days due to the internet. YouTube, you can almost get that really brief, what some people would call the skim milk, if you will, of a topic. And it almost makes it that this allows us to kind of dive deeper into a couple of different topics. And it makes me kind of happy that we as a society can actually have this kind of discourse and this ability to provide people with this kind of information.
Yes, and I like this as well because I haven't given a TED Talk.
Yeah.
TED Talks are short.
Yeah.
They're focused. They give you very important information, but you really don't have a chance to really delve deeper into what you're saying, into really the essence of what it is we do, and the explanations behind it, etc. That's why I like talking about it. This is who we are as people.
Yeah.
And you need to discuss the topic. You can't just sort of throw out the information and say, okay, here's all the information, that's it, bye. You need to really delve deeper and ask the questions about it. So I enjoy this immensely as well.
Well, I'm very grateful for that. Our last question is not necessarily topical. I do believe it's a little bit in jest. You've seen the movie Jurassic Park, obviously.
Yes.
You're approached in a similar fashion to Dr. Alan Grant. Do you take the money? Do you go to visit the island of dinosaurs? For me as a geneticist, I would first go, one, how? Number two, there's so much in that movie that they got right in terms of fossilized DNA, but there's also a ton that they got wrong in terms of DNA. But if you would just give us your perspective on the situation.
Well, it's interesting is that my approach has always been, if I'm talking with people about money to support science and the science we do, I say, okay, this is what we have. If this is something you're willing to support, great. I offer no guarantees that we come up with anything that you may want to see or not see. It comes down to the data will be there. You have access now to what that is. So I can maintain an open communication and feedback, basically. So here's the data, here's the experiment, here's the data, this is what we're finding, and then it comes down to us as scientists to interpret that. So no one offers you something and says, okay, I want you to now find me this very specific thing that it has to be only this. That I wouldn't accept, because it comes down to that I don't know that that's what we would find. It's like you can't predetermine the outcome.
Well,
you have to keep it open-ended.
That's why we don't take money from the Coca-Cola Corporation to do a study on hydration. It's a conflict of interest. To tie everything up with a nice little bow, same thing as we did last time at the very end. I want to give our audience a few more moments to formulate any last questions that they may have. Is there any questions that you have that you would like to ask for me? Or is there something that you would love to tell us about what you're currently doing, or something that you found interesting that you wish to relate to the general populace? I leave the floor open to you, Dr. Balin.
Well, I think I enjoy this interaction, Joe, and thank you for inviting me to do this. I think that as you go off in time, others will also participate.
I hope so.
to really, it's information, which is really important, and the more information can get to the larger population, I think and that we have, can be really important. We don't have all the answers to what we need to have answers to. We're working on that. We are committed to finding these answers, especially to the neurodegenerative processes. That is my primary interest. There are so many different topics to talk about, so many different things coming out now almost on a daily basis with scientific discovery, utilization, with technology and applications, that we could talk forever on these topics.
This is true.
And in some ways, we need to talk forever on these topics. Yeah. It's something that is very important for human development, human exploration, human knowledge. I mean, it can transform us into a society that is is chronically impaired through disease to something where we understand what chronic disease is and how to really start to control it or to solve the problem, understanding causation.
Yes.
Prevention. I mean, that's where we need to get to. So all of this could be helpful.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And, I want to echo a sentiment that was just shared with us, that it's been a pleasure to hear us talk on these topics. And Aya would love us to do this again. And she would love to hear us talk on these things for, forever. So there was a TV show that my father loved that was called Connections. It was from the 1970s, and what it does is it takes a single concept that's introduced in the very beginning, and then it goes to where it originated in the past, and it takes the little tidbits that kind of evolve it to the point where it is in the future. So you come full circle, but you get the connection along the way. Another one is obviously Carl Sagan, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Bill Nye. We need these not necessarily celebrities, but we need these science-rooted people to step in and basically take the jargon that we live in and put it into a fashion that is easily digestible, but also inspires people. I've always said to many students, a person is rational, a person is calm, they are intelligent. People can be stupid. People can be quick to judgment. They can get caught up into a mob mentality. And I do think that us taking this time to have these conversations is not only beneficial for us because we as a scientist, yes, it is an MIB quote. That is absolutely true. We as scientists can learn from each other in this, but also at the same time, we're sharing the two perspectives that we have. My perspective as a young, idealistic scientist, and yours as someone who's much more well experienced in it. Not necessarily less idealistic, but more experienced in the action.
Say that.
Right, more experience, and that's the thing. It's the experiences that kind of define us as individual researchers.
It is, and those experiences will continue on, and the more experiences you have, it sort of builds upon itself. Since I'm significantly older than you, it comes down to that with age there does become a level of wisdom of the process. And I'm still as enthusiastic as I ever was about doing science, about making a difference for the population, because that's what we do this for. To me, it's still an excitement there that is part of the essence of who I am as an individual, and that's what I try to sort of describe this to the students, that when we talk to them in class and we talk to them about science, we talk to them about medicine, whatever the topic is to get them enthusiastic about it, so that there's an excitement in doing it, and not that, oh God, it's a drudgery of having to learn this and then going off and doing it, working with the population, etc. No, it should be an excitement about it.
I agree. And again, thank you so much for coming and joining us, Dr. Balin. You are always 100% welcome to join the stream for any reason, whether or not you want to do another interview or have another conversation, or to even join us if we are playing a game online. You're always welcome to join us.
Well, thank you, Joe, and thank you for all of you who have attended as well. So it's been my pleasure.
Do you think there are any video games that do that sort of outreach? Yes. So there's one final question, and it was directed at me. But there are certain video games that are directed towards activating certain aspects of your brain. So one of the things that I did as an undergrad was I took a course called Intro to Game Programming. Very interesting course because it was more of a practical application of logic. And it's a usage of logic to generate something that is a constant loop. And that's why it's called a game loop whenever you're doing it, because you're technically repeating the same inputs over and over again. But there's one such that Aru Warrior is talking about, which is Kerbal Space Program, which is a game where you're designing rockets to shoot off into the moon. And it's a physics-based game, so you actually have to design your rocket in such a way that it will actually get the lift that it needs, but it's not too heavy. It's aerodynamic enough so that it doesn't tilt one way or the other. It's a little too involved for me because I prefer something a little different. But there are actually, I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but there are actually scientists that have developed apps and games to further science. There's actually, I wanted to mention this to you.
I haven't.
There's actually a video game. There's an app called Sea Hero, which is used for cognition testing. And what it's used for is it's actually you're given a map, and then you have to go to a goal based on your memory of that map. And they actually generated data enough that they were able to publish based on the demographics of certain people.
That's interesting.
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting. There was one researcher that I got to know when I was a graduate student, and what they were doing was they had made a Facebook game where you had to combine pieces of a line puzzle, and they were actually using it for recombination testing of how a gene can, how DNA can actually be moved around.
Reassort, recombine.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah, very interesting.
That is very interesting.
I mean, again, there's multiple topics that you and I can probably discuss, and we have discussed in our private time here. As you kind of heard, Dr. Balin is a very busy day, and that day can be further confounded by me knocking on the door and going, "Hey, I had an idea," which unfortunately some weeks seems to happen more often.
That's true.
than not. And, I am very grateful that you always have that open door policy whenever I do knock on the door, that you're willing and open to hear those kinds of things.
Well, you never know when, and I never know when I'm going to learn something new.
Yeah, I know.
So I'm always open to that.
So again,
discussing that.
Thank you, Dr. Balin, so very much for joining us this evening. Let me just bring it on home for everybody, and we can all go and get something to eat for dinner. So I want to thank you all for joining us. I know that we had a lot of fun tonight. I hope that you did, and I hope that you got to learn something. If you feel it necessary, feel free to subscribe. If you don't want to, if it's too much in terms of monetary compensation, please just give us a follow. It does help our channel grow, and it helps us to reach more people so that we can bring certain content like this out to more people. If you're watching this on YouTube, hello from the past to the future. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And please let us know if there are questions that you have. Please put them in the comments so that we can, potentially address them to you at a later time. Thank you guys so much. So long, everybody, and thanks for all the fish. Bye-bye.